All right, everyone. Today we are lucky to have with us Jeremy Takala. Jeremy Takala, known as Kahmiltpah in the Yakama Nation, hails from the Kahmiltpah Band. That's Rock Creek, located on the Columbia River. While he's also a proud descendant of Hopi. He's nominated in 2020 to serve as the Tribal Councilman for the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakama Nation. And he's currently chairing the Fish and Wildlife, Law and Order, and Legislative Committees, which keeps his schedule pretty eventful. Prior to this time in office, he worked 12 years in the Yakima Klickitat Fisheries Project at the Klickitat River Research Monitoring and Evaluation of Fisheries Facility as a technician. His hands-on training and Washut upbringing has contributed to his skill set as a CRITFC Commissioner for the Nez Perce, Umatilla, and Warm Springs tribes. He's compassionate about upholding his tribe's treaty rights with the federal government and protecting resources for those yet unborn. So I'll let you take it from here and introduce a little bit more about yourself and the work you do, and then share with us some of the projects that you were going to share. And after about half an hour, I'll try to interject and we'll get some questions.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I guess I can introduce myself in our language. Pax'una'shut, Shaputimki, Jeremy Takala, Huapamianowe, Chi, Patraipa, Washnashtawach, and Chi Wanapa, Kahmiltpah, Wayam, Pawanpa, Hopi. Good afternoon, everyone. My Indian name is Pax'una'shut. My English name is Jeremy Takala. As Alan mentioned, my last name actually comes from the Hopi people located out in northeast Arizona. But my maternal side, I come from the Yakama Nation peoples. We consist of 14 tribes and bands, which make up the Yakama Nation. So I do want to mention that because it's very important to identify, each specific band, tribe, or village. When the U.S. government was negotiating treaties, we're grouped into one, basically. Kind of like the classroom you guys have there, but each of you, are very unique. You guys have your places where you come from, identifying yourself. So it's very important for us as Yakama Nation to specifically identify which band do you belong to or which band do you come from. Alan, you hit it on the nail there. I did work for fisheries program for a number of years. I grew up traditionally, a single mother raising me. I had the opportunity to live with my grandparents, which I'm very fortunate because they were one of the last remaining few fluent speakers in our language. Many of you know residential schools, boarding schools, disallowed us from speaking our language, and we're trying to make a comeback, bringing the language back into the classroom with some of, some tribes are doing immersion schools. But other than that, I also serve on the Yakama Nation Tribal Council. I'm one of the 14 elected officials. One of the youngest, actually. I was elected in 2020, January. I was 33. And my responsibilities is serving on our Fish and Wildlife Committee as a chair, our Legislative Committee as a chair, and our Law and Order Committee as a chairperson. Also, part of my responsibilities is I'm the Yakama Nation delegate for an organization that was formed in the late 70s called the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. That's an organization that consists of the 4 treaty tribes, which are the Nez Perce, the Warm Springs, the Umatilla, and the Yakama Nation. If you were to log on to your laptops later on and Google USV Oregon, you'll see some fishing cases that our Yakama fishers endured, going to prison for fishing, getting cited by state fish and game officers because in our minds, our treaty gave us the right to retain that right to fish and hunt and gather in all usual accustomed areas. So when you talk about tribal people being forced on a reservation, For the Yakama people, yes, we do have a reservation, but we've never ever gave up that right to hunt, fish, and gather at those usual and accustomed areas. So we to this day still carry on that way of life. I know we're short on time. I was telling Ellen I can talk all day, and we can talk about what Yakama Nation is doing to protect and to preserve and to restore our first foods. I do want to touch a little bit. We have a fisheries program strategic plan, and I want to read an insert on it. It goes like this. The Yakama people are truly blessed with this land and its many resources that sustain us. We're also blessed with a way of life, with our language, and with teachings passed down since time immemorial. As part of these teachings, we acknowledge our responsibility to speak on behalf of those that can no longer speak for themselves. Therefore, we dedicate this strategic plan to our ancestors who passed on these ways and who cared for this land before our time. We dedicate it to many leaders who fought to maintain our way of life, whether on a battlefield, in a courtroom, or on the edge of a river. We also dedicate it to our employees who continue to follow the path laid down for us and maintain the legacy and mission to, quote, make it like it was, quote. Lastly, we dedicate this plan to those future generations who will inherit what we leave for them. After all, we don't own this land. We are simply taking care of it for them. That's a piece that we got out of our Yakama Nation Fisheries Strategic Plan. We have a lot of great tribal biologists, a lot of tribal people that are taking these managing positions. For us here in the state of Washington, we consider ourselves Yakama Nation as a co-manager of the fisheries resources. We work closely with our state partners and other non-governmental partners to advocate on behalf of the anadromous fish species. We'd like to take on additional work, like residence fish. I'm not sure if many of you have been up to the Northwest, but we have a huge amount of hydroelectric dams in our areas. So I'll touch on that in my presentation here, but I'll get going here, Alan. So we'll go ahead and share the screen here. So I'm going to go ahead and this is prior before getting on to Tribal Council. Can you guys see that okay? The full presentation, Alan?
We can also see both pages though.
Let me switch it. You see that better?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, so this is a outreach PowerPoint we usually utilize, and we call it Salmon in the Classroom. We have many outreach partners here within our program. We, if you can visualize the state of Washington, and I have it in my slide, our usual and the custom lands cover a third of Washington state, meaning pretty much the peaks of the Cascade Mountains up to North Washington, up to Omak, and all the way down to the Tri-City area. They call it the Palouse area. And then we come on down to the Columbia River. But we also recognize that we have rights on the Oregon side, where we have different bands and tribes gather the roots, the berries, and also the Pacific Lamprey down in Willamette Falls, down south of Portland, Oregon. We also harvest harvest smelt, which is a Yulicon on the Cowlitz River. So we still have active fishermen and an active program here that goes out and participates in harvesting for our people. So this is a very a good presentation you'll have. We usually use this in a classroom, and I want to acknowledge our outreach coordinator, Jeanette Burkhart, and also our hydro coordinator, Elaine Harvey. She's actually my aunt. She's a really traditional person. She's one of our biologists for our fisheries program, but she's also taken that responsibility as a hydro coordinator now within our fisheries program. So this is just a quick slide here. I want to talk about lands and waters of the Salmon Nation. We live on the Pacific coast. And so a lot of you, you can see the Columbia River Basin here, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, and Canada. Montana, that's pretty much the headwaters of the Columbia River, but you also have a lot of headwaters in California, up into British Columbia and Alaska, who all contribute to the anadromous fish species out in the Pacific Ocean. So there's a huge amount of monitoring that takes place, identifying, which stocks are where they're coming from. Historically, we had around, some say 16 million, 17 million, 20 million before hydro systems came into place. Now we barely get not even a million fish return back to the Columbia River Basin. So you can see the dramatic, impacts of hydro systems and many other factors that play, into the negative impacts of salmon population declines. So that's a good note to take, around 17 to 20 million historically. This is the Columbia River here. To the left, you have Mount Hood. To the right, you have Mount Adams is the first volcano peak. To the above that, you have the flat top there where Mount St. Helens is. Many know that it's erupted in the 80s. And then to the right of it, there's a little small snow. That's the Goat Rocks. And then to the north of that, you have Mount Rainier, which you can, typically see from Seattle. But these are important because they play a huge role, as these are glacier-fed tributaries that contribute to the Columbia River. Climate change, we're seeing a big impact. Glaciers are receding. You're talking about, years and years and years of contributing, but now we're seeing smaller winter seasons, warmer spring, fall-like conditions, and definitely hot summer wildfire seasons. So to us, Mount Adams, we call it Pato in our language. Historically, we refer to these mountain peaks as ladies in our legend stories. These are snow peak capped mountains. We actually had a success story. President Nixon back in the 72 made an executive order to return half of this. Well, we had an issue with jurisdiction, so we were battling a Klickitat County for it. We eventually won it. The Supreme Court did not want to take on this case, so eventually it means that we own half of this mountain and the lands around it. So a very unique mountain that holds dear to our heart. This is a salmon picture in the bottom. We call it Waikanish in our language. Every year, and Alan was a part of our feast this past August, but that's our last feast. But in the springtime, we usually have I refer like a Thanksgiving, like we're giving thanks for the return of the salmon, that we acknowledge it in our traditional way of songs and prayers, that, a year later, the salmon has returned, and that we're honoring it before we allow the other fishermen to go out and just catch a fish. So I want to mention that. This is basically a aerial view of the White Salmon River Basin. I'll touch on this a little bit later, but to the north, you have the snow, the white area, that's Mount Adams. And then to the left, you have the Gifford Pinchot National Forest, which kind of overlaps our reservation to the north of Mount Adams. I'll touch on this a little bit, but on the bottom there, that's the Columbia River where it flows in. It's probably about, I'm going to say 20 miles or so from Portland if you travel west. So many of you in the classroom here, but historically, this was the Celilo Falls here, which contributed to many, many fishers coming to the area, which was a big area for trade. You talk about year-round fishing. Well, this is it where you have it. You had the steelhead, winter steelhead, you had spring Chinook coming in, you had summer Chinook, then you had the sockeye, or they call it blueback, and then you had the fall Chinook, which we refer to them as brights or king salmon, and then you had the coho run, and then you had summer steelhead, and then you had coho was generally the last one, but you also had sturgeon in here, you had Pacific lamprey, you had whitefish, you had bridge-lip suckers, but due to the hydro systems, many of those native species were impacted. Sturgeon, I'll point this out, they're landlocked. they don't travel up and down the river like they historically did. So we do have a program that works with the sturgeon. We actually raise sturgeon, and we actually have a new Pacific lamprey program as well that are trying to trans and relocate and reintroduce Pacific lamprey into historical tributaries. So this was a big area for trade. My grandpa fished this area. We have a lot of elders that reflect back to this day. But this is all underwater due to the Dalles Dam. The Dalles Dam was constructed in 1957 of March 10th. And, it's traumatized their people, with our way of life that was basically made way for progress. Am I lagging? Can you see that?
You're good. Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so to the right you have Celilo Falls, and this is for before the dams were put into place, but you have these different areas such as the Short Narrows, the Mamaloose Islands, the Long Narrows. Well, these were all other areas to fish at as well. Like everyone sees Celilo Falls and they think that's the main fishery. It was, but there was different areas where you have to think about the different fluctuation of the water level, during the spring runoff season to the late fall, early winter seasons where the water is generally low. So this is just an old historical map that talks about the different areas where we're fishing generally in this area. This is the Long Narrows right here looking towards Mount Hood. Where you see the cliffs here, this is now where the Dalles Dam is. So, a fast flowing, free flowing, moving, wild river. Definitely, what our anadromous fish species like. They're attracted to flow. They're moving upriver. Easy access, free ride out to the ocean for the out migrating smolts. Probably nearly 100% of the smolts are going to make it out to the ocean. But now, with the slow moving, pretty much a system of lakes, we're having predation problems that are feeding on our out migrating juveniles. This is the 10 Mile Rapids here. This is the same thing. This is above the Dalles Dam. So, mainly basalt rock and platforms were built, temporary structures for fishing. Spring runoff, obviously this water would be covering these cliffs here. So you see a gentleman there who just caught, looks like 1 or 2 fish in his one dip net. So very, 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 strong run back then. As I mentioned, trade, this is an ideal map, a mock-up imagery of, what it looked like. You got the different tribes that came to the Celilo Falls to trade many, many things, Many of these people did not get salmon in the area, so they would trade for dried salmon, smoked salmon, you name it, then they'd bring their goods to trade with us. So you talk about Wall Street. Well, this was the Wall Street in the Northwest that historically natives had. This is just a mock-up imagery too of, the different bands. You had the Cascades, the Klickitats, the White Salmon, the Hood River, the Wishcoms, the Wascos. They all overlapped each other, but these were some of the names of these places. A lot of it too was documented when Lewis and Clark were traveling over, the best of their ability to write it down in their book. They've touched on these areas where they've met with the different tribes and villages talking about it. And, that's the thing about it is our people were welcoming, we actually pitied them because, they were traveling long ways and they didn't have no food. This area was new to them. Wasn't new to us, but it was new to them, This is also just the trails that was added. I don't know if many of you know, but you go visit parks, highways, passes, freeway passes, highway passes, going over mountain ranges. More than likely, those are historical Indian trails, native trails, trade route trails, seasonal rounds where we travel to the different foods. So state parks, those are generally probably former villages that you're sitting at. When I talk about fish, this is salmon is included in all of this seasonal round. This is a calendar of the foods that are basically provided by Mother Earth and our Creator, that we still lively and still actively gather to this day, that we're handing down to our children. So this is a really good picture. I like this one. Jeanette Burkhart was able to locate this one from one of our relatives, but basically, yeah, it's still an active today. Alan, you see those girls picking berries? Well, you were in that area this past August. I'll skip this one. This is just more trails. I'll skip this one. This is just preserving huckleberries, salmon, the traditional way. They didn't have no refrigerators, freezers, so dehydrating was the best way to preserve foods to get through the wintertime. Cultivation, you talk about science trying to say, hey, this is a good idea. This is what tribes need to do. Well, we already knew that. You talk about burning of the lands to restore it during the wintertime. Well, we knew what to do. We were our own stewards. You know, they would say when berry season was over up in the mountains that some of the medicine people would make fires and burn the land up so it'd be, you know, in good health for the next year's gathering purposes. Well, we're working on that with our fire management program. You know, we have areas selected where we're going to go up there. We may do a little bit of thinning so, you know, the trees won't choke out the huckleberry bushes, and then we'll treat it, you know, with fire. And then obviously we'll put it out, and then that way, you know, it leaves a better nutrient soils, and, you know, for the whole huckleberry area to better provide for the people, and not only that, the animals that utilize the food. These are just pictures of homes. Many, I know there's a lot of stereotypes about natives, you know, they all live in teepees. They all live in, you know, well, that's not true. You have a lot of tribes in the Southwest, you know, that live in Pueblo homes. You have the plains and teepees. You have different homes. Well, we do live in teepees. We have actually tule mat homes, which are basically tule wreaths that are water repellent, light, easy to pack and travel. We live in a seasonal round, so we travel. You know, some will stay at the Columbia River and fish. Some won't. Some will travel. We have canoes for traveling. We have horses. And then we have the longhouses pictured at the bottom where we have our ceremonials that take place. People think, you know, we weren't carpenters. Well, we would utilize, you know, spring runoff would push down cedar logs. We would basically plank them, you know, make plank houses out of them. So, you know, our people were really crafty and handy, and, you know, they had an idea what to build. Pit houses were in the ground, you know, wintertime kept a little bit warmer than rather build on top of the ground. This is just a mock-up imagery of what Mount Adams looked like. Transportation, canoes, still utilized today. We're bringing it back. Horses, a lot of people recognize Nez Perce, people of the Northwest, as horseman people. Still carry that way of life today. This is just a picture of a particular band of the Yakama Nation called the Klickitats, the Huatquai Pums. These are just pictures, and the picture of the guys fishing, that's called Lyle Falls. It's still an active traditional way of fishing that still lives to this day. These are another band, Washko or Wishkam, they call them. You have a bride down below wearing her dentalium headdress with her beaded dress, and you have the gentleman with his braids. Still, people recognize their lineage of those families. And now we get to the Treaty of 1855. So this is what we definitely put forth as protecting. You know, we have a treaty with 1855 with Governor Stevens, Isaac Stevens. Our elders back then, you know, really recognized the need to retain those usual and accustomed places to continually actively fish, hunt, and gather at all usual and accustomed grounds. Well, sadly, we were tested in the courtroom. We have a case called So Happy versus Smith. which pertains to fishing. Many of our neighbors that came in thought once they owned the land that nobody has access to the waters. Well, that proved wrong in the court cases that the Yakima people do have the right to access through your property to get to the water banks to actively fish. This is the ceded lands that the Yakama Nation has basically, negotiated in the treaty. The Yakama Nation reservation that you see in the pink, that's the current reservation. But the land you see that's gray, that's the ceded lands where we retain the right to gather, to hunt, what I mentioned before, in those usual and the custom areas. So there are many wars on going on. Some bands and tribes of the Yakama Nation remain peaceful, but others, did go to war to fight for, what was negotiated and agreed upon. This here is, let's see, it was originally 10.8 million acres, and now it's 1.3 with the current reservation. I'll skip this. This is a little bit different because we're talking about white salmon. So this one is mainly about fishing. As I mentioned, the clause that says right of taking fish in all usual custom places, still retain that right. We did, again, court battle. We upheld the US v. Oregon, which is the Judge Bologna decision. And Yakama Nation holds a unique position because we were also a part of the US v. Washington, which was the 1974 Judge Bolt decision that basically established the tribes as co-managers of the fisheries, which also means that we, as a treaty tribe, we are entitled to half of the harvestable catch in that agreement. So, there was times where we didn't have that ability to have half of that catch. And so it took court battles to actually have that included in there. So that's what was ongoing during those times. It was an ugly situation. Again, we actually had elder fishermen sitting in federal prisons for fishing. I'm going to skip this a little bit more because I want to talk about what it is that we are doing to preserve the fish, the salmon. For Yakama Nation, we have a fisheries program that was established in the 70s. We had one or two biologists at the time with a few technicians. Well, obviously that has grown. We are one of the largest tribal fisheries program in the nation. We have full-time seasonal, about 200 to 220 employees that work for the fisheries program. That includes hatchery supplementation, meaning hatchery programs. We have hydro coordinator, as I mentioned, that Elaine Harvey is. We have many biologists. We have habitat and restoration. We have particular biologists that oversee projects such as the lamprey project, the sturgeon project, the coho project, the sockeye project, spring salmon, and mainly pertains to different tributaries like the Klickitat program or the Yakima River program. We have grown over the years. We do work with the state partners. We do try to maintain our involvement if there should be any proposals such as, parcelization of land that are basically on the riparian zone. For us at Yakima, we get concerned about parcelization, which leads to development, which leads to, a water permit, basically. Climate change is taking a toll for us. And so it's our mission to make sure that there is good water quality for our anadromous species. We do retain funding. However, it's very difficult working with our partners. We do talk about a strategy and a plan to, fund shovel-ready projects that consist of fish passage. Working with our irrigators, we have a Yakima Basin integrated plan where we have a lot of heavy agriculture in our area. And we don't want to make it this salmon versus the dams, or we don't want to make it the salmon versus the farmers. How can we work together? And for us at Yakima, we feel like, we're taking that bigger approach to try to at least let's work out the details here. Let's get at least something going for the sake of our fish. And then we talk about dam removal. That's been a big hot topic here in the Northwest. For Yakima, it should be on the table for discussion, analysis, and removal. But as I mentioned before, we need to start looking at shovel-ready projects that can actually improve our fish runs before we get to this. But we actually celebrated this event, this Condit Dam event, 2 weeks ago. Condit Dam, and it's about a nearly 100-year-old dam. Did not have fish passage. So you can see in the bottom picture that there's a big lake, a reservoir. It provided power just for a few hundred homes, and basically it was looked at, well, it's going to cost more money for us to create fish passage, and what's required through different permitting process, especially when we talk about ESA listed species. So they went ahead and we start talking about removing the dam. And you could find this on YouTube. It's a Nat Geo, National Geographic. So it was removed. Down below, you can see when the demolition took place. There was a dynamite. Pretty good excitement. You'll see it on YouTube. Results? Well, it actually restarted naturally. We created miles and miles of spawning ground beds for anadromous fish. There's a famous falls there called Houston Falls, and the picture you see there, a fish jumping. Well, it's been nearly 100 years since a fish has jumped that falls. You see the bottom left picture, we have a RME crew, monitoring and evaluating crew, doing spawner surveys. They're taking samples from spawned out fall Chinook. So success. Bottom right picture, that's the former lake, Northwestern Lake. You see a natural restoration take place, but also with the help of us, we went out and we planted native plants and trees to help restore the area. We also had fish returning to the tributaries of the White Salmon River as well, as you see in the right picture of Buck Creek. So that concludes my presentation. I know we're short on time, but I want to allow some time for questions if possible, Alan. But that's just one area that I'm focused on. I mean, there's so much we can talk about. One thing I do want to point out, when we talk about dam breaching, is what is the energy replacement going to be? For Washington State, through legislation, we've had a lot of, we want to eliminate CO2 emissions by 2045, I believe is what the goal is. But for us at Yakima, now we're feeling the impacts again, as if we're seeing the hydroelectric dams coming into play. We have a lot of about 90 or 95% of green energy projects being proposed in our ceded land, that third of Washington State map that I showed you. Gathering grounds, we have a lot of work that's taken place. But the message is if you're gonna mitigate CO2 emissions, or try to produce more energy because of the population growth in the region, we can't be mitigating CO2 emissions if it's going to have a direct impact on our work. If a project's going to require a water permit and it's above a ESA listed tributary, there's competition there between an ESA listed species and a water permit taken. So we're trying to work with our partners here. We want to make sure that we get ahead of this. most importantly, the last thing I'll mention is cultural archaeological sites. Yakama Nation is very opposed to projects being proposed in those sites. It's like a church. Remember the fire that took place on the church of was it Notre Dame? Notre Dame. Remember how everyone was flooding so fast to get it rebuilt? They had the funding page. Well, these sites hold just as very much as an important meaning to us as Native people. And so when we see the destruction of sites like that, that's kind of the similar, reaction that we have. Why can't we protect these sites that are important to us as people? And that's what we got to remember is the treaties. The treaties are the supreme law of the land. Any treaties negotiated. So I'll end with that. I want to thank you for your time. I know there's a lot to take in. I know there's a lot of note taking, but if there's any questions I can take or even afterwards through email, I'd be happy to respond the best way I can. So thank you.
I might have to switch you to my computer because something just happened to our monitor, but we saw everything. So thank you very much for your presentation and that last note on the kind of energy, I guess you said energy replacement, really makes me think of how much the structure sometimes from the top down model looks at things kind of dollar for dollar or one thing exchanged for another, but it seems like it's hard to exchange the foods and the life of people in the land for watts, and energy. So that seems to kind of come across.
So some of these, like we want to work with our partners, like how about mitigation, but some of these sites that are being proposed are irreplaceable. Once the destruction is done, it's done. One of the things too, when we talk about how are you protecting or restoring your foods, we have another program that's a part of our fisheries called the Superfund program. And what they're doing is they're basically doing holding those accountable to clean up former like smelter plants or sites that are contaminated, with PCBs and so on. So I'll give you an example, like Hanford. Oh my gosh, that's a huge mess, the Manhattan Project. And that lies right along the Columbia River, right where the White Bluffs, they call it, are just north of Tri-Cities. And so you can see the amount of pressure and responsibilities that we are trying to work and yet to put that responsibility on those who made this mess,
Yeah.
And, again, the pressure's on us. I'll just say that. We've been corresponding, to a lot of these green energy projects. We're not against green energy, but we are concerned about where they'll be placed.
Well, thank you for your ongoing work. Students for questions, comments. Yeah, you may need to come a little closer.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. A few summers ago, I had the chance to summit Mount Adams, and I was wondering if the idea of summiting the mountain has any particular significance with the tribes. That's something that's done.
Okay, so I'm glad. So you're familiar with the area. I'm glad. Okay. For me, it depends on which family or tribe or band that you come from, but I would never ever climb Mount Adams because it was told to us not to. Legend stories say that all those mountain peaks that you've probably seen, Mount Hood, Mount St. Helens, Rainier, Mount Adams, they're considered to be ladies. And if you've seen Mount Adams, then you've seen the higher peak kind of just by Goldendale called the Simcoe Mountains. that was formerly a volcano at one time, but legend stories say that all the mountains were jealous because she was the first one to greet the sun, so they destroyed her. But when legend stories come to play, they're generally told in the wintertime. There's always a moral of the story to tell, to give, make sure that the men have a responsibility of how to be, how to treat a lady, how to be with your kids, or how to be in general. And then also the same for the ladies. What was told to me, and it's funny that you brought this up because I heard this past spring when we're talking about green energy projects, is that mountain that was destroyed by all the volcanoes. Well, in return, the creator made her to be like the provider of all these foods and all this thing for the deer and the elk. Like she became more of a bigger provider than the other ones did. So, but I'm happy that you hiked that to the summit. We do have a few tribal members that have hiked it. So I know which area you hiked. You hiked probably the south rim up on top, and you were probably viewing mainly the west, east, south.
I don't actually remember which route I took up. It was for the program.
Nice.
You know, I want to underscore as well just the scale of the work that you described. I mean, you shared a couple of images and examples, but really the number of rivers, the upstream areas that have been restored as part of this kind of mandate and just huge landscape project is really, I think, just an amazing example for landscape architecture nationwide, you know, if not worldwide. So we still have a couple minutes for, yep.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm just curious about rights of mountains and rivers, and if it's something that your Confederated tribes are involved with.
Yeah, I think what we're hoping to do, I guess, I hope this kind of somewhat answers are close, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to work closely with the different counties that lie within the map that I showed you guys, the third of Washington state. We talk about riparian zones, we talk about critical ordinances area. You know, our biggest concern is land getting parcelized and developed. We want to make sure that we have a government to government relationship or consultation to say, hey, look, we want to add a comment, you know, to your draft language, you know, because it doesn't meet our needs or our concerns. So we want to make sure Yakama Nation Fisheries is there to submit, not only just to say, hey, look, we're here, but yet to kind of cover their end as well, because we don't want to come back years later and say, oh man, we should have listened to the tribe, you know, and now they're suing us, you know, because of this, because that's kind of what it turns out to be in the end, you know, the end result. You know, they say in the end, you know, water is going to be the biggest fight, and I think it's already here, you know. We do try to work closely. We also want to look at land conservation. You know, I know there's a few tribes out there that have long conservation or land trust programs, but we want to eventually develop that actually quickly rather than later. But we do work with close partners. Columbia Land Trust is a good example. You know, they conserve the land. We go in there, we do the work. We do habitat restoration work. We take out old existing roads that no longer function, and then we restore it to its natural state.
Thank you.
So I know Washington is like primarily hydro powered right now, but I was wondering if you know, like, to what extent wind power is being pursued. I know like there is a lot of wind power in the ceded lands, like in Wenatchee and Moses Lake area. And I was wondering if that's something that's being pursued, like with greater frequency, and like what your perspective on wind power as opposed to hydro is.
Yeah, so in 2000, let's see, I don't want to say 2012. So you're right, Wenatchee area, and also along the Columbia River, just south of Goldendale, you have it on the big Columbia Hills. One of the issues that we are finding out, and this is firsthand knowledge too, is we have sometimes we are restricted from access when those projects happen. Many times, the private developer ends up saying, this is mine, nobody else has access to it, you have to get permission. But, as long as the foods grow out there, we still retain that right. But it's just consistently trying to educate developers or people new to the region. We haven't seen impacts to wildlife. We had seen eagles and hawks getting killed by the blades. Seeing remains of them found out there. I don't know if wind farms have been really anything that's been moving forward. I feel like it's kind of slowed down. Just from what I've been seeing, because I live in that area. I do see a lot of proposals for solar projects, and also they call it SMRs, small modular reactors, which again is going to be requiring water. Those are the proposals up here. I know we do have an enterprise called Yakima Power, who provides energy or power to our Yakama Nation members. We joke around about it, but apparently our manager is going to come up with some sort of hydrogen solution, which I'm like, okay, when is that going to be? I don't know, but that's a long shot. I hope that answers your question. That's the thing, is that if projects are going to come in and we're going to say, yeah, okay, it'll work here, we still want to make sure that the tribes have access to those areas as well. But it's very hard to, especially when you have a huge population of deer, elk, wildlife, bears, cougars, you name it, Yakama Nation has posed that to the different, like WDFW, DNR, like, hey, look, your department has an obligation also to protect these resources, and they feel the pressure from developers though.
Thank you.
I guess just to end on this, I would encourage you guys we do have a Yakama Nation Fisheries website. We have a great outreach coordinator. She manages the site. It's called Story Maps. You can look at each of the specific work that we do. And also the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission has a website. There are our technical support. Yesterday I was in Astoria with a department that we just retained in 2020 called it's called CMOP. It's actually the Coastal Margin Observation and Prediction Program. So they monitor the Astoria area and some out in the ocean. So there are lower estuary technical support. We also, CRITFC has a genetics lab in Hagerman, Idaho. So when there's any ongoing like electrofishing, tagging, samples from hatcheries, we send all that genetics down to Hagerman to identify. Because I do want to say this, for each of you to know, just because a fish is a fish doesn't mean they're the same. They're very unique. They all have their own certain genetics. They belong to this tributary, that tributary. But when it comes to a reintroduction, like they've been wiped out for 100 years, then they're generally all going to be the same genetics, like sockeye. That there was never ever sockeye for a while, and then we hired our own tribal member. His name is Brian Saluskin. We got that sockeye reintroduction program going, and it's been a success. But we still have climate change right on the backs of us. So it's been very kind of creative on trying to develop ways to protect, preserve, and restore our fisheries. But I do recommend checking out those two sites. You'll find a lot of information on there. Alan, I don't know if you've seen that video. We do have a Land of the Yakima video. I know the student there mentioned Mount Adams. There's a good aerial footage of a plane or drone flying around Mount Adams. We have Elaine Harvey, who I mentioned earlier. She is on there, as well as Davis Washines, our fisheries manager, David Blodgett III, and myself on there. So really great video.
Well, thank you very much for your ongoing inspiring work, and we will, I'm sure, all follow up with you. If not in the near future, then in the distant future, and just make sure, you know, everything keeps going strongly. So let's give Jeremy.
Yeah, and I just thanks Alan for the invite. I'll mention this. I seen this guy walking around up in the mountains, have our seasonal huckleberry feast and up to the mountains. And it's Alan knows, and we build the structure up, and it's a temporary structure. And I was like, who is this guy that got himself? And then next thing you know, I was up at our office that Monday, and
Same
that's
guy.
that's the guy I was talking to up in the mountains. Alan didn't know I was
Taking
on
trouble.
council. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'll see
You guys.
see you around.